Okay, so I'm John Nyman. I've been playing around with F Sharp for about 7 years now. I have put code into production with F Sharp to the chagrin of my previous employers. So yeah, it's not a super popular language right now out in Arizona, but out east, like in New York and such, among financial apps, you'll get a ton of use. Are you guys familiar with Jet.com?
Mhm.
Yes.
Walmart's, Amazon.
Yeah, so all their apps are written in F Sharp. So it's definitely a language you could do anything you want with it. And we won't go over the all the intro stuff to F Sharp since I've already done that, but just so you guys know, I am in the market for a job. So if you guys know of any .NET full stack jobs, that would be great. Um, so let's see, there we go. So a lot of this material, it's been gathered from my own experience, but also I took some of their hints from their blogs that um, go over some nice tips for scripting in F Sharp. And let's see. Oh, yeah, Chris Smith.
Chris is the best I've heard of. Burning Monk.
Okay, I don't know what his actual name is, but that's his blog. Is the Burning Monk, and um, he's he's he has some videos on um, going to like massive scale, and like Amazon was gonna use them um, as a showcase, but then the investors pulled out of the company, and so I wish I could remember his actual name. I probably should have put it down, but yeah, he's a pretty smart guy. Um, so just some tips to get started. Um, so scripting can be done in the command line. You could use F Sharp Interactive, or you could create a file called FSX. So FS would be your regular F Sharp file, and X is your scripting file. Um, so scripts are great for one-offs. Uh, if you're creating a new design, it's nice to be able to test it and explore different ideas. Um, Exploring objects from other places using type providers. Are you guys familiar with type providers at all? Yeah, so um, it's just so type providers are they generate types on the fly as you're typing from foreign places. So if you have a URL that has a JSON, you could hit that URL um, and you and it'll create the types for you from the JSON. You could do it with SQL Server. We'll be showcasing some of those today. Um, so in like C Sharp, there's C Sharp Interactive. I don't know if any of you have used that before. And then there's LinkPad, which I think is a lot more powerful, but I haven't not used that myself. So um, yeah, I imagine it's probably similar to F Sharp Interactive. Um, so, and then anytime you're working with F Sharp, make sure you install the F Sharp Power Tools extension. It makes a world of difference. This has nothing to do with F Sharp, but I thought it was funny.
That is now my favorite joke.
Yeah, and I didn't come up with that one, but yeah, I thought it was funny still. Okay, this is a tool that someone created for working with the uh, F Sharp Interactive. If you need to like see some details and stuff like that, you could use it. I've never used it but just thought I'd put it up there. So some other scripting ideas. Fake is similar to like rake or make building tools. So a lot of times if you're using like Visual Studio Code and want to do your own build, then you could do it with Fake. And a lot of F# developers really like that. So that's all the introduction we have.
You can go around. The sensor's on your side.
There it goes.
Yeah, I had to get all the way there where the front before it turned on first.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. So we'll start with it. Here we have F# Interactive. And actually, yeah, we'll keep that down there. So this is kind of our interactive pane. And this is our FSX script there. So you can see I could highlight it, push Alt Enter, and that gives me the add. So this is the signature of the function add. So that's just saying it takes a value x, which is an integer, returns a function that takes an int and returns an int, and then that function, yeah, and then you could return another int. And so then we could take add. We can add 1 + 1, and there we go. We got our int 2, and it is an it. And so if you guys are familiar with the Unix shell, it is a what is it? It's kind of like the, I believe the $underscore, right? Yeah. So a lot of languages kind of use it. Kotlin explicitly uses it in its code. And you could actually take it down here. It plus 1 is 3. And so it's just shadowing the it variable there. And so it was it 2, and now it's 3. And so it didn't actually overwrite it because it's all immutable, right? It just kind of overshadowed it, I believe is the term. So you can see here.
So if you do it plus 1 again will equal 4 or 3 again? Will it keep that variable at 3 or is it only doing the one time operation?
It'll go to 4. Where is my cursor? There it is. Okay. So we do like let x equal it. So it's still 3, and now x is 2. And then if we could do like 1 to 999. So you only need to put those double semicolons in there after, when you're in the F# interactive part right there. You can see it is now a list. So if you find yourself in an infinite loop, you just right click, reset the interactive session, and it'll exit that infinite loop. Or you could do Control Alt R, or for long operations that you decide you don't want to do anymore. So let's see. So if you want to, uh, if you need to know what your source directory is, that's a constant that lives inside of your interactive, and your source file would be that one. So there you go. You can see that where I have it right here. There's your source file, read files fx. So let's say I have this file. So I'm going to take that source directory and combine it with this file name right there, as CSV ones, and read all the lines. So now I have that in cities. And I could read the,
You got an error on this.
oh, I did.
Yeah, if it file was, had no clue what you're talking
Oh,
about.
oh, yeah, I didn't open System.io. There we go. Yes, yes. So then I could do array head on that and get the header. If you want to know what any of these symbols or anything are, just go ahead and stop me. And I could explain them.
Well, I want to ask more, what are you trying to accomplish here?
Right now I'm not.
Trying to read all the cities from a CSV file?
Yeah, so what I did was I read all the cities in a CSV file into here, into this variable, just line by line, so it gave me an array of, a string array of all those cities. Yeah, and so that's what I printed out here. So right now we're not accomplishing a whole lot, right? So I could take that and get the tail, like all this. So we got the head, which was the header. And there's the tail that gets all the data, right? Okay. Now we're gonna hit a type provider. So a lot of F# users, they really like Packet. It's an alternative to NuGet package manager. And so when I retrieve that package, when I bring it into the interactive session, like you could see all these, it has the version right there. Well, if you bump up to the next version, you're you got to change everything, and it's kind of a pain. Well, with Packet, it removes that versioning for you and just has the latest one there. So let's see. And then also you don't need to use Visual Studio, and you could use this F# on Linux, and you could use it in iOS or Apple, right? You could use VS Code, so you don't even need Visual Studio. You just use the Ionide plugin with that project. And that actually defaults to the Packet. And I really like Visual Studio by itself, so I don't mind the extra long loads compared to VS Code. So yeah, so if you wanted to, you could say, okay, I have my reference, and just right click on it and send it interactive. And then you don't need to highlight it and start it. So the I here just says, hey, let's start with this directory. So let's say I want to start with the package directory. And then, should be thinking. So, okay, I think that's why. No,
Slash add, use the add in front of it. In front of the string. In front of the string? You need an add. Yeah, I think so.
okay, yeah, that's right. Okay,
And my check.
yeah, so there you go. So you could, if you're pulling in multiple packages, you could just do that. It makes it a little shorter. So let's open F# data. And then with this type provider, so type providers can work across multiple pieces of data. And this one's working with the CSV one, right? And it's using the comma delimited. And I can bring that in. And then I'm going to say, okay, I want the rows. And I want to get all the first ones that are listed. So the first city that was listed was Youngstown. And so you can see here, so it skipped the header for me. And then got those city, and then so I have the cities. And then I said, okay, for that sequence, get just the first row. And then I'm using a lambda function there and saying, okay, grab the city. You can see here, I can grab any of the other information. And I never created any of these types. It did it on the fly for me. And then I said, okay, go ahead and print that out. And it's using currying. Are you guys familiar with currying? It's kind of like partial application, where you're just applying part of the code, you're just putting in part of the parameters, right? And then, yeah. So it's a huge feature, kind of gives you a lot of nice things that in an OO language take a lot of work. So let's do this. So now let's say we want it between latitude with a minimum of 42 and 41 and 42. And then we take those cities again for the data. We filter for anything between those two values. And then so in C# link, that would be like select, right? So we select the city, and then we print out all those cities. So we go down here, and we see all those cities. Oh. Oh, did I do it wrong?
Yeah, you need it to be less than the max, not because the remainder part would actually push over the line. The minutes and seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. But when you go to 42 degrees, you stop at 42 degrees. 42 degrees in 1 minute is outside the minute.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. So yeah, so you can see how powerful that could be. You know, your manager comes in and says, "Hey, I need this piece of information really fast." And you're like, "Man, that's a real pain to do." And he's like, give you the CSV file, or he gives you a database, and you have to figure out all the different things to make it work. Well, with type providers, it's really easy to get working. and then you're just worried about the logic of, okay, how, I want the average number of people that visited the site between this time and this time, and that performed this certain action or something, right? Um, and I need it in 5 minutes. Well, if you're using this, it would be, I don't know if you'd be able to get it in 5 minutes still, but it'd still be pretty quick, right, compared to doing anything else. Um,
I assume that besides working with CSV files, it also works with XML, JSON, all these other different types of data.
yeah, it does. So it's pretty powerful. And if it doesn't work for a piece of data that you're trying to get, then you could make your own type provider. Okay, so okay. So this is came from the Bernie Muck notes. Let's say, okay, we want to title case all these files. It's just a one-off thing. We don't need to do it again, or it's unlikely. But if we do, we have this file saved. We could put it in a repository and always have it again if we ever need to do this one-off thing. And so let's see. There it is. So in here, so we have all these. We have this burning dumpster and Harris, my kid, and Zorak. We want all these title cased. So we can go back to our script. And so we'll go ahead and run it. And it says, okay, so these are my files. We'll go ahead and then, so I renamed them. There they are. So if I look at here, F5, there we go. Everything was done. So yeah, just there's all sorts of situations where you just want a little script to do something for you. We could step through the logic there if you want me to, or we could go to the next part. Okay. So sometimes you want to use another file or something in your code. Maybe you want to do a test on it and try and figure something else and play with it. But it's in another file, and so you need to load it in. So just a quick note, if you do change the person file after you've already loaded it in, you might need to close this file, your scripting file, and reopen it just so it reloads properly. And then if you had other references in your person file, then you'd have to also load those files into there. But we're just going to load person. So let's go ahead and take a look at what person FS looks like. So we have the namespace, scripting F#. We have the module person and the record. Person with the first name, last name, and birth date. And you could actually put that in there too. You could actually script from an FS file. You don't have to have an actual FSX file. So let's see. So I'm aliasing that module to person. You know, or I could do it to probably make more sense to alias it to P. And of course, I could have just did open scripting F sharp, and that would have given me the person, right? And then I just type person dot first name. And if I didn't alias it, I'd just be able to type it right in without any of this, just like that, right? So let's see. So let's go ahead and run this first part. There we go. We successfully used one from a different file. Now let's say we want to use one from a scripting file. So it's the same thing as we did before. It has a module named math, and we go ahead and open that. And 1 plus 1 is 2. And most of the time you're not going to put the module in here, right? And so it has this handy dandy thing where it'll give it, if you're referencing another scripting file, it'll make it a Pascal case reference with the file name. So there we go, 3. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that just so you guys. So there's the add. So it's just taking the add symbol and making it equal to add. And then we're saying, okay, this is right there. It's taking an inline function. So the plus symbol is like a function, right? And when you put the parentheses around there, you're using it as a function. So it's just passing in, is partially applying the 2 to the addition. So then I got the add 2. Confused. Clear as mud. Okay. Okay. So you can run a script file from the command line and use the fsi.executable to do that, which is located right about there, unless you have a different version, of course. And all this is up on GitHub, so if you guys want to look at it later, it's there. So let's see. This symbol is a backwards piping. So like in command line, you have that pipe symbol. Well, in F sharp, you just add an arrow to it, so you could do arrow this way or that way. But in this case, we're doing a backwards. Whoop. We're doing it backwards, so we could avoid just doing this, since it's only requiring one integer right there for the print line. Right. Yeah, right. So you could do exactly just like you said and do that. And so the piping just makes it so it's easier, so you could apply different functions to like a list, or in this case, just an integer as you go through. And it makes everything really clear and easy to work with. So let me open my command line tool, Commander. We'll get the full path. And I have it in my path, so I don't need to call it directly there. So 1 + 1 is 2. How about that? Woo! And if you want to get the command line arguments, use your environment.commandline args. Set it to a, so I guess it gives it to you as an array, but it's easier to pattern match over it with a list. So this is a pattern match, and let me make it a little easier for you to understand. Max match. My list with. So pattern matching is basically just a really fancy case switch statement. Far more powerful than a case switch statement. But we're just, so here we're doing it with a list. You can pattern match from the beginning to the end. So this is saying if the first element in your list is a dash dash, then take the rest and return the rest. And if it's something else, we don't care what it is. That's what the underscore says, is I don't care. I'm Pierre. Yeah. Sorry, you guys didn't get it. Yeah, a little book that's, you know, if you have kids. I don't care, I'm Pierre. Or so anyway, so it does a recursive function. So it calls the tail, and so it goes through and keeps searching for that double dash. And then at the end, if you never do find it, it just returns an empty list. Okay, so then we go ahead and pass those args in, and then we'll print them out. And the A there is just for, it does pretty printing for a generic variable. So let's go ahead and call it. So si dash dash, yay, this worked, I hope. Yay, it did. Okay, so let's say sometimes you're working with the interactive and you want it to work different, and sometimes you're compiling your code and you don't want that interactive testing playground stuff in there, right? So we're going to load in the if interactive, which looks like. So just so you guys know, F#, your files have to be in a certain order, and if they're not in that order, it won't compile. So like if you're using something from a different file, that file needs to be above it. And so you could do directories and everything if you have that F-sharp power tools. And you can move them up, so you just push the Alt. So like, let's say I'm on interactive there, I can push Alt and the up and down keys to get it in the right position. So here we have this module if interactive, and then you have the special commands, the pound if interactive, then write start interact, then make the message value be started in interactive mode, else make it started with the program. So in the program, we open if interactive, and we get that message value, print it out, and then we'll just wait until I push enter. So let's give it a shot. Okay. So it started with program. You guys can see that up there. Oh, even better. Okay, so that worked. Now we could double check and make sure that it works in here. Started in interactive mode down here. So just like we expected, huh? And of course, you know, we could even do it in our command line. So what's this going to tell me? Started with program or interactive? Okay, let's find out. Started interactive. So yeah, since it's starting with that file, it's going to still be in interactive mode. Okay, sometimes you just want to do simple performance measurements while you're working with it. So you have the pound time directive, and if it's, you don't have to have the on here, but if you don't, then it just kind of toggles on and off. And so if you run it a second time, it'll be off, and then it'll turn itself on the next time, and such, right? But if you need more powerful profiling, you could use this privateeye.io library. So let's see, this is what it gives you. So yeah, so it performed it in this time. So you could do it with, you know, if you want to test different ideas, say, okay, which one's faster, you know, it's a great way to do it. If you ever need to do 64-bit, go here. So let's say sometimes you the scripting gives you quite a bit of power to kind of play with and everything, but sometimes you want to just kind of step through it and see what's going on, right? Well, if you go to Tools, Options, F# Interactive, enable script debugging, true, And there you can see the 64-bit interactive. I'm not sure if there's anything else you have to do if you set that to true. Let's see. Then when you right click on it, you do debug and interactive. So we'll go ahead and step through some of this code. Oh, yeah. You got to right click and debug interactive. And you can read that and, oh yes, yes. Got to reset the interactive session. And then you need to debug in interactive. And I actually never actually use this tool, since most of the time when I'm playing with things, they're pretty simple. So here we go. Then you could go through your normal F10, F11, and it'll say, okay, let's see. You see our locals. So we have a 15 and a 1 for D and N. And that gives us so, you know, that's not divisible, so we'll go ahead and go to the next one. Oh, we got one that was divisible. There we go. And that's how you do it. Pretty powerful tool. Options. Back down volts. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is probably one of my favorite features in F# is the type providers, right? But then being able to hit a database directly is just amazing. So this is all on the fly. This uses fsharp.data.sql client. They nicknamed it "Not Your Grandfather's ORM" because it is pretty powerful. So it is very lightweight, comparable to Dapper ORM. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it gives you types. It gives you typing. With Dapper, you have to go through and write all your own types out, and it's a real pain. But this, like you hit if you're hitting a stored procedure, and that stored procedure changes, it will tell you the next time you open up your file. So it's just amazing. Let's see. So here we're. Oh yeah, yeah. So I gave a talk on the SQL Server Data Tools earlier today. I changed the name of this to last update offset. And so you can see there it gives me all those different types, and I didn't need to type any of that in. You could write SQL code directly in there. And so if I said title 1, I want to get that. It says, what the crap? That's not in there. There's no column called title 1. It gives me an error. So there you can see again, it gives me all the types for free. Then you could also, if you prefer, you could get the SQL file. So we have a SQL file in here called get film. That's just a simple select. But you know, sometimes you might want to open it up in SQL Server Management Studio, right? And play around with it. And so perhaps you do something like this. You'd say, okay, declare at film ID, and it's int. We want to make it just for testing purposes too. So when you're in Management Studio, you could just take that out. You could play with it, work with it. When you're done, you can put that back in. Then when you open up here, it'll call that file, make sure everything works. And if it doesn't, it'll give you that error message. And if it does, then everything's peachy. So let's go ahead and there we go. So it gave us this information, all that other information. Let's see. So that one came from here. Give us that information, right? So yeah, that's pretty powerful. And so this library also does enumerations. So sometimes in a database you have certain values enumerated, right? Well, this will give you those types and enumerate it for you to use around in the rest of your code. So you're always using the latest enumerations in your code. So yeah, I mean, it's just floors me every time I use it. Going and using like C#, I'm just like, man, this isn't nearly as good as type providers, because you always have to remember to update your ORM, right? You have to do an update if you change anything in your database, or but this does it all for you. Yeah, this one, let's see, so this one was the stored procedure right here. And it's SQL Server 2012 and above is what it works with. Yeah, there are other ORMs that work with F#, but none of them do quite what this does, because like MySQL doesn't, because it's hitting the database and having the database give it that information. And like MySQL, there's no way it can do that, right? But I mean, like NAD framework does that, and you could use that in F#, right? And then I think there's some other libraries in F# that work similarly to NAD framework, that will get the structure of all your tables in like MySQL or whatever, and then you'll use LINQ to actually query over those. So, but nothing quite this lightweight and powerful. So, and looks like I'm done a little early for this one, but you guys have any more?
Massaging data and manipulating existing data, and from there you can create your own data, correct?
Yeah.
Is that the main purpose of F#?
Well, F sharp, you could use it as a general programming language also. In the introduction class, I went over kind of more of some of the other things, but um, F sharp, it gives you really good static typing. You could represent really complex ideas in a short amount of code that's very clear. So it gives you like union types, which, uh, let's see. Um, let's see, add item. It's so if you need to do like parallelism and stuff like that, it's really good for that. Um, so so yeah, if you're everything's immutable by default. Um, you can do null in F sharp, but it makes it harder to do null, and you use options instead, so you always know if it's a value or not a value. Um,
So you're not
uh,
left wondering what type of data type you're working with?
say that again.
So you're not left wondering which type of data type you're using?
Yeah, so if,
Is it assigning what type of value this is that you're working with?
so like let's say um, my nullable int, or let's say string, because you can't do that until C# 8, right? Um, where it tells you if it's, so you could say sum, so then, you know, so you'd have to, so that's an option type, and then you could say, uh, right? So you could give those two, and then if you want to use it, you'd have to match on it. So you'd say, um, so you could say do, we'll print it. Let's see. Okay, so if my nullable string is sum, then we'll print whatever it is. If it's none, we'll do nothing. So here you could say there's code here. F sharp gives you union types. Let's say, so we had that person, right? So your record person. So you can see how simple it is to set up records compared to C#. It's very straightforward. So it's very concise code. It's not as noisy. So we could say the type of person. So employee. Employee could be either, let's say, a regular worker, or he could be, what else, a manager?
Worker, manager, trainee,
Yeah,
whichever.
so we could say trainee, and then we could match over those. So let's see. let,
I'm curious to see what F# can do. I mean, I'll definitely look into this more on my own. It's just that since I wasn't here in the beginning, I don't feel like I understand the program itself. I've heard of the name, I've just never looked into it before. So,
yeah, so it's a functional first programming language. And so it gets all the wonderful functional stuff. But it's more powerful than that because it can interact with C# code. C# can interact with F# code. Not in the same. You have to have different projects. Yeah. So it's a very friendly language for interacting with the outside world. It's a very friendly language for doing parallelism, asynchronous coding, so pattern matching, which gives you a very powerful way to do unions, discriminated unions, which gives you a very powerful way to represent uh, business logic. You could actually make it so you can't program illogical business logic into your program because of your type system. Um, so yeah, so yeah, it's a pretty amazing software. It's definitely worth looking into, and yeah. Well, any other questions?
So I have a use case where I want to scrape a bunch of data out of a database and then just throw together a really quick and dirty GUI just to display that information in an interesting way. Are there things that F# interacts with or integrates with well to do that sort of GUI programming, or am I looking at something more?
Yeah, actually, there's a charting library that I probably should have added to the presentation, but I've never actually used it. But yeah, there's a charting library that you could create charts that are pretty nice, and if I had access to the internet, I'd show you what it looks like.
Do you know how to call it?
Probably like f#.chart or f#.charting.
Googling something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's something like that. I mean, but yeah, it gives you beautiful graphs and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, and so it's actually very good for that. But I've never actually had to do that before, so I haven't done that. So yeah, it's definitely. I hope you've seen that it's definitely good for a scripting language at least. It's definitely good beyond that too for a full programming language. And what's nice about it, if sometimes doing the OO way is nicer than doing the functional way, and so you could do it. Most of the time I do it the functional way, but you know, some of the libraries that you rely on are done in the OO way because of some of the advantages that they give you. Cool. Any other questions?
Have you ever run any of these Azure functions?
I have not.
That's one I know. Azure functions, I think, is C#, JavaScript, and F#.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a framework called it's probably the most famous framework for writing web APIs, RESTful APIs, and it is called. It's right there in my head. So yeah, but it could actually run in because it's just a console app. So you could actually have it run inside Azure Functions for you. And I believe it's the only one that does that, that's able to do that.
So you say F# is there parallelization? How so?
Because it's really,
Like it's built into it?
yeah, Well, so part of it is just everything's immutable by default, so you don't have to worry about locks and such like that. And then like if you are running a parallelization, so let's say you have a list, and you want to perform some operations on it. Yeah, so
Does it automatically do parallelization or?
so you do like list parallel here. The one I use most of the time is I have a list of async functions, and then I do async dot parallel, and then async dot run synchronously. And so it'll do all this asynchronously for you, and the run synchronously just kicks it off and gets it going, right?
I mean, yeah.
You can, but it's cleaner and
Okay, so it's just down there. You can't get that built in. That's baked in day one. Okay. For F sharp.
yeah.
That's- Okay. What's it add on?
Yeah, like async await, that idea came from F# too. So, but I mean, you could see how simple that is. I mean, it's just pipe, do your thing. Yeah, I don't ever have to run like regular functions in parallel, but you could definitely do that with F# too. I just have to look up how to do it, because I never do it.
That's what you can just do all in parallel. Okay.
Yeah, Expecto is written in F#. It's one of my favorite testing libraries because it's really easy to test APIs with it. And you could actually, it has a friendly interface for C# too, so you can actually do all the code in C# and then run it. So, and that does, it's asynchronous and parallel. Everything, when it runs the test, it runs them all in parallel. Any other questions? You're all in love with F# now. Yeah, it does take some time to get used to writing it and using it.